I want to move on to the topic, I'm kind of ashamed that I even have to do this and kind of angry that I have to spend time on Easter weekend talking about this. But I personally was on Twitter this past week, and all of a sudden this podcast came out, and I thought I had seen the first podcast, the original one, and I'll splice it in, the original one too, that really bothered me as someone who works in the physical bullion industry.
Eric, we got several listener emails, and at the same time, we had seen several articles published this week about the breakdowns in the physical gold market and the paper price decoupling from the physical metal price. What's going on there?
Well, Patrick, that answer comes in two parts. The first part is an old story repeating that we've been through many times before. I can't believe that people keep falling for it, frankly. But current events do bring about a new story. So let's cover both halves of this. The old story is this. Anytime that there's any kind of crisis which creates a lot of demand for retail gold and silver coins and bars, the small silver and gold rounds and gold eagles and so forth, the various retail products. What happens is the physical dealers start peddling this bullshit story about how supposedly the paper price of gold has decoupled from the physical price because the system is failing and the end of the world is coming and the sky is falling and the secret cabal that is trying to manipulate the gold price is finally disintegrating. It's all a bunch of unadulterated bullshit. What's going on is the physical price of gold and the paper price of gold are exactly the same as long as we're talking about the physical price for 400-ounce London good delivery bars, the wholesale-sized piece of gold. What happens is those retail products, the small coins in retail bars, are in short supply. So what the dealers do is they price gouge. They mark them up dramatically. So suddenly there's a huge differential between the price of gold to buy London good delivery bars, the 400-ounce bars, and that's the same as the paper price that you see quoted. It's the same as the price that's reflected by the GLD ETF. You have to pay a great big premium in order to order gold eagles and other retail-sized coins because they're in short supply due to a temporary condition of strong demand. Rather than stock up and be ready for that strong demand, the dealers are smart enough to go the other way. They publish articles talking about how there's a breakdown between the gold price, the paper price, and the physical price. They make up all kinds of bullshit. It's not real, people. Don't fall for it. So that's the first part of the story. But in this coronavirus crisis, we really do have a part two to the story, which is there really are bona fide issues with getting good delivery bars, the 400-ounce bars, out of the London Bullion Market Association because London, the city of London, is locked down because of the coronavirus crisis. So you can't deliver more 400-ounce bars from LBMA to the refiners that actually create those small retail coins and bars. If they can't buy more 400-ounce bars as their wholesale stock to make more coins and retail products from, then obviously the shortage intensifies. That allows them to price gouge even more and mark those retail products up to a huge premium over the actual price of gold. And in order to make you feel like you're not getting price gouged, they tell you this ridiculous story about how there's a breakdown going on between the physical price and the paper price, and you better move quick and pay that big upload in order to not miss your chance, because it might be impossible to ever get physical gold again if you don't act right now. It's all a bunch of nonsense. If you want to buy physical gold at the current paper price, it's very easy to do. You buy the GLD ETF. And by the way, folks, the physical gold that's owned by the GLD ETF is just as physical as the physical gold that you can buy in coins and bars. You sit on your GLD shares for a few months until this crisis has passed, and at that point, You sell the GLD shares and you use the money to buy your retail coins and bars at reasonable prices when that big premium comes out of the market. You have to believe that the whole system is failing and the world is coming to an end in order to not be able to see that that approach is better. Therefore, the dealers will tell you that the whole world is coming to an end. The sky is falling, and you better move right now and pay that big premium. Otherwise, you're going to miss your chance. It's all a bunch of bullshit. Don't fall for it.
That really bothered me as someone who works in the physical bullion industry. But we have to respond to the MacroVoices April 8th, 2020 podcast entitled Hot Topic Number 13, Gold for Grown-Ups. Jeff Christian debunks the myths of the market. Now, for those that don't know, MacroVoices podcast is a pretty popular podcast out there. They do interviews and various topics in the macroeconomic environments, and the host, his name is Eric Townsend. So this was a podcast between Eric Townsend and Jeff Christian. It was essentially a drive-by shooting of a whole bunch of people in the precious metals industry, with a lot of attacks on people's character and not really any real attacks on some of the allegations or documentation that have been presented. It was simply just, it was an embarrassment, frankly. So we had to get together and do this so people who listen to that could at least have another side of the take or argument. And so let's just start with your general take of what you heard. I'll let you start on what you heard in that interview and what's your overall feeling of what went on in that.
Look, I think I've been on that show before. I haven't listened to the show, so I don't want to speak about it out of line. What I did see was a tweet from Eric Townsend calling precious metal dealers charlatans, and I took offense to that. Not because I even think he meant me. I think he was talking about small coin dealers that are charging massive premiums. And I just thought it was a really pathetic approach, especially considering he fancies himself as a contrarian and someone that's sympathetic to gold ownership, because it seemed to me like he is so, it reminds me of this joke. You've got these two young fish, they wake up in the morning and they go out for a swim. And then all of a sudden there's an older, wiser fish, and he swims right past them and he says, "Hey fellas, good morning. How's the water today?" And so then they keep swimming, and a few minutes later, one of the young fish turns to the other and says, "What's water?" And it's like, these fish are swimming in water the whole time, and they don't even know. They never really thought about what is water. And someone that's trading futures like Eric, I feel like he has no idea what gold is, how gold works, what the future is there for, what's causing the actual price discovery. And people like that tend to get married to the charts, and they most likely only purchase futures contracts for speculative purposes. So they're the people using the interactive brokers accounts, never taking delivery. And so I thought it was a very disrespectful thing to do, to go out and criticize families and businesses that are literally suffering right now because they can't get physical metal. They cannot get physical metal, so they're going bankrupt. They're going insolvent. I know jewelry companies in the East Coast that are going insolvent right now because they've been promised material that can't be delivered through OTC contracts, through offtakes, and everyone is claiming force majeure. And so this guy comes around and says, "Oh, you're all crazy. This is complete nonsense. The futures market is the true price, and the price you're selling at above futures is a complete fraudulent price." When the physical market is just doing, in fact, what's the worst part about this is people like Eric make their money because there's a physical market that ultimately takes delivery of the metal. He's just engaged in usury, for lack of a better term. He's just trading, and that's fine. Speculation is fine. I'm not against speculation. But the fact that he would go out and somehow turn what is clearly a physical symptom in the market, that there's a lack of physical metal. You can't get it from any bullion banks. You have to wait 3 or 4 weeks to try to get it from COMEX. There's failures, and dealers are just adjusting. It's not like they're making any more money. They make money by volume. The more volume they sell, the more money they make. But the premiums they're charging from the distributors that are somehow able to get some metal and sell it to them, that doesn't make them a charlatan. They're just hardworking people. So I took offense with that. And so I posited, a few questions to him. The first was, you can't be trading gold or talking about gold, really, in my opinion, unless you're well aware of the monetary history that attends to the gold market. Because people like Eric or Jeffrey Christian, for example, who I understand was his guest, they would likely have been the people in the late 60s who were telling you everything is fine in the London gold pool, when there were rumors swirling that the London gold pool was breaking. And when France pulled out, or when another country like Germany pulled out, they would have been the guys telling you, what are you talking about? Look at that mathematical price. That's the price. And then, of course, a few months later, the London gold pool broke and the price of gold exploded. They're the same people that would have told you that Richard Nixon would have never suspended the gold window. And so we know throughout history that there's always this attempt to separate people from their gold, and that there are powers in the government that have a philosophy of money that doesn't understand gold to be at the root of that philosophy. They think money should be an idea or a collective good. And those are the people that are in charge. And so they have an ideology, and the LBMA symptoms that we're talking about could very well be the next London gold pool, where one day we wake up and there's a run on the LBMA and the price breaks, and then it goes up to $2,000 or $3,000 an ounce. And people like Eric will say, oh, well, I could have just traded the futures. But they couldn't have. They would have had to roll their futures. They would have gotten destroyed on decay. Maybe futures contracts become force majeure if LBMA breaks. Who knows? So people like us are providing the physical analysis of the physical market. And it's a very important signal. It's one that shouldn't be discounted. In fact, I can't think of any other signal that would have explained why the price of gold before coronavirus was $1,700, why it ostensibly collapsed in futures market while the physical market never collapsed like that, and then why the price is right back where it was before coronavirus and preparing to set a new high next week in the futures market. I mean, with Eric's analysis, doing charts and technical analysis, he would have seen that breakdown after coronavirus started and panicked and sold his contract. And anyone that was in the physical market would have looked at the signals and would have said, hey, what the hell? I can't get physical. There's a massive physical premium. It's taking 5 days to get metal out of London. I can't get metal in New York, and would have held on to their metal and continued to own it. So I don't understand his approach philosophically. I don't understand his approach just morally in terms of respect for the physical market. But I honestly don't understand his approach as a speculator. I'm a former hedge fund guy. I've made a lot of money in the hedge fund business. I just don't get what kind of framework that gives him to speculate. It almost seems like the only argument that's good for is to go short the futures.
Yeah, Ned, I mean, I thank you, Roy. Ned, what was your first response just listening through the hour of that interview? What did you think?
Where to start with it? I mean, look, it's on one level, I feel a little bit sorry for Eric Townsend, because when you start lobbing rocks at people, you've got to make sure you're on firm ground. Somebody who goes around calling himself hedge fund manager and all this sort of thing, straight away, proper people don't do that. You don't, if you're doing stuff properly, you don't need to go around saying things like that. So immediately one sort of starts digging a bit and sort of peeling back the layers here. And look, what I really take issue with, actually, more than anything, it's just different to Roy. I was really quite upset with the personal attacks that were used, not just by him but by Jeff Christian as well, with zero evidential backing. Indeed, not only that, but this sort of claim. I think there's a claim in it where they talk about it being a cottage industry. So somehow making out the idea that talking about a dodgy business in the gold market is something which makes people money. I mean, the people involved in that over the last 15, 20 years have not made any money from doing that. They're doing it absolutely for the right reasons, which is to try and understand what's happening. If they were making any money, it would have been doing something else alongside that. And I think the use of language of calling people charlatans, which I think technically means having special knowledge, or rather purporting to have special knowledge and actually not having any at all. It just seemed like projection on his part. The use of that word repeatedly was quite interesting. But I think also it seems like there is some desperation, like Roy said about these videos and these constant comments that are coming out. It probably is very like the breaking of the London gold pool, and these kind of people probably were in a very different environment back then. There would have been some stiff with thick milk bottle glasses who would have been pushed out in front of the press going, it's all fine. I'm sure that would have happened too. So look, lots of conflicting emotions, some excitement because it feels like we're very close to a sort of denouement here. But also, I think that some specifics do need attending to. So, this idea that people who talk about the manipulation and dodgy behavior of bullion banks are somehow making it up, when last year the US government charged JP Morgan with RICO, with mafia-style behavior over 10 years, which was exactly what these same people that these two were claiming are charlatans were saying. Indeed, as you know, even the very specific details that were handed out have been confirmed, and these banks have been charged on that basis. So look, I mean, there's lots to go for there. I mean, what was your sense of it?
Yeah, so let me be specific. They trashed in their interview names like Eric Sprott, organizations like GATA, names like Bill Murphy, Ted Butler, Andrew Maguire. And you may have an opinion on any one of these different persons or institute or organizations, but they didn't actually refute a lot of the damning evidence. And for me to sit here and start going through the really damning evidence of London and the CME Group, it's that would take a long time. I may put some links in there for people to see. We're gonna have a Google Doc for this podcast so people can go deeper into this rabbit hole if they like. But I was just ashamed by the tactics that they were using and the brashness in which they spoke. I was ashamed that I've actually interviewed Jeff Christian. I was trying to be nice to that guy, I think a year or two ago, and bring him on to Silver Doctors because I felt bad. A lot of people on Silver Doctors just trashed that guy for years. And he was right. Look, he called that 2011 peaks essentially in both silver and gold, and you got to give him credit for that. So I tried to bring him on to talk about points that we have agreement on, and he was friendly and nice and all that stuff. But there's another side here that came out in this interview, and it was very ugly, and it requires refuting to keep honor. I would feel like a coward if I didn't come on this podcast today and at least stand up for these people, because I have respect for a lot of the people they trashed, and I just don't think it's right the way they acted, the way that they. It just wasn't right. It was juvenile. It was pathetic.
Yeah, to pick up on a couple of those just specifically, I mean, the Maguire has taken an enormous amount of flack over the years, and whether he massaged his CV. The point being is that specific information that he handed over led to prosecutions. I mean, the idea that you can call someone a Walter Mitty character when actually he was the guy that delivered evidence that ended up with actual movement from regulators and from the state against these banks. So I thought that was particularly strong. And on a personal sort of work level, I'm completely furious about the stuff that Eric Townsend said about the Sprott Bullion products. I use them in my fund. I think they're the best things you can hold, which are listed as bullion vehicles. And some of the things that were said were really quite outrageous. You can't go around making outright falsehoods over and over. I mean, one thing in particular which was just extraordinary was this statement that, I don't think he was trying to be clever. The way he said it effectively inferred that PHYS, the Sprott physical gold fund, was trading at a 25% premium. I think it is actually at a premium though. It's something like 0.2. But then he said it can't trade at a discount because it would be arbed. Well, absolute nonsense. It's been sat at a sort of consistent 1 to 2% discount for about 7 years. And this is just one of several things to do with the Sprott products, while sort of stating that GLD was fantastic and this, that, and the other, that were completely wrong and do need to be corrected. You can't Like you say, I feel compelled to stand up and go, well, hold on, wait a minute. If you're going to say these things, someone's got to come back and go, that's not correct. And there was a particular thing he said where he conflated the two products in a very important way, which is not true, which is he basically said that, if there was a financial system collapse, you could go after the individual firms that stand behind GLD for your gold, whereas Sprott, you would only have to go after Sprott. Now, anybody knows anything about how this works is it's just absolutely gibberish on every level. There's nothing about that makes any sense. The GLD, no investors going to touch any gold at any point, period. Now, with Sprott, if you own sufficient, anybody can redeem it. And just the incorrect nature of so many things that came out during that podcast was a bit shocking, but also kind of interesting and quite nice to hear in a way. If that's the best they can come up with, it was amazing.
Yeah, there's one thing, it's how below the belt they went. Jeffrey Christian, CPM Group, they work with a lot of different outfits in the industry, and I respect listening to him sometimes because it gives me another point of view that's worth listening to, and he has some interesting insights, but his outfit works with all types of characters. And for Eric Townsend to start talking about precious metals markets and criminality and all that stuff, that's partially true. And there's this weird gray area in our industry where, you have semi-numismatic con games going on, people getting their entire IRAs, their retirement fund trashed by overpriced fractional somehow gold or silver pieces. There's a lot of different types of scams. I've documented a lot of them on our website at SD Bullion, and I try and do my best to get people to understand, look, when you come in these markets, you have to do your due diligence to find proper bullion dealers who will sell you the product and give it to you in a fast, with good service, etc. So, but for years now, Jeffrey Christian and the CPM Group has been working with an outfit that essentially was born out of the 1970s Western-led precious metal bull market, and then suffered through 20 years in the bear market. The name of the company is Monex, and for anyone who's been in the United States and lived in the United States, it's basically a company that was branded in the 80s and 90s, and they still look like it when you go on their website. And it looks like the only people who really go to that website, I would imagine, are older generational, maybe baby boomers, who are smart enough to know to just buy bullion from them and not get involved with their leverage Atlas account. But the point of this is that CPM Group has worked for a handful of years with Monex in the last handful of years. And the CFTC alleged that Monex, from the year 2011, I believe, to 2017, used their leverage off-exchange Atlas account to the tune of $290 million lost by the customer base of Monex. And for anyone who understands kind of the operations, the mechanics of the Atlas account, and the CFTC hates it because Monex essentially is outside of their jurisdiction, and they ran this lawsuit up against them in 2011 to 2017. I'll leave a link in of the lawsuit. You can go read it. It's 32 pages, and it's terrible when you read the allegations that were made. Monex got out of it. They didn't get in trouble. CFTC's tried for, I think, almost 4 decades now to shut that down, and they've been unsuccessful. So, but he has no problem, apparently, Jeff Christian or CPM Group, to help them in their marketing efforts, which I find gray. I probably have other words, but I'm guessing I'd get a lawsuit if I started using those words online. But I just find it very hypocritical to act as if you're somehow a saint and you're here to tell the truth. So I just, the whole thing is embarrassing, and the fact that I have to actually voice this and say this and put my own neck on the line to say it, somebody has to. And so essentially, I don't care. Maybe I'll never talk to Jeff Christian again, but the CPM Group works with Monex, and Monex is not a company that I would ever trust with a dime of my money.
Yeah, well, I mean, he also said that the mining companies all pay CPM Group for research, and we meet with most of them. We own a lot of stock in a lot of these companies. I'm certainly going to be asking whether this is A, true, and B, why on earth they would pay for it. Apart from anything else, the mining companies aren't in the business of taking strategic advice on anything. So I'll be looking into that too. But it's like you say, the whole thing was just very embarrassing and really just in poor taste. And the choice of language throughout, this sort of despicable this and disgusting that, and and it just doesn't sit well, particularly when most of the allegations of manipulation and bad behavior have been proven.
Yeah, I mean, documented facts like U.S. Treasury cables, 1974, when the COMEX was set up, being in London, talking about how we need to inject essentially volatility into these markets to scare away gold as it's getting re-legalized in the United States in 1975, because that's a threat to the fiat currency that's currently debasing like crazy. The gold price is 200. It went to 100 within about 18 months after that, after the COMEX started. But then they weren't too successful from there. It went from 100 to 850 roughly. So they maybe learned a few tricks along the way, and it's gotten more complex. But where there's smoke, there's fire. And essentially, I think the comeuppance is coming. And for people to sit there and bash people who have that feeling or that take in the way that they did is just it's just bullshit, to be flat out frank. And then I just we'll move on. I definitely, I'm sure you guys may have one other point, but we drag this out as long as it's going to go. I probably will intersplice a whole bunch of different things so people can understand why we did this.
I just want to say, from my perspective, I don't think, I respect that you guys have your opinions on this. I think it's a lot simpler to analyze in terms of someone like Jeffrey Christian. I mean, look at what he does for a living. He's writing research that he hopes to sell to people in the market that are selling metal, either extracting metal or selling metal to the end consumer, who is us, the buyer of the physical. So we're causing this whole industry to form, and he's just serving the interests of whoever. I mean, if you paid him money, he'd write any research. One thing I know about analysts, they'll write anything you pay them for. They'll write any kind of report you want. He just happens to be writing the kinds of reports he's writing because that's the business that he has. That's how he makes his living. But for them to forget for a moment, about the water, about what they're actually doing, if they're talking about gold, and make these blanket statements about people is wrong. And I'm glad that we've all called them out on it in our different ways. But I don't even think he has that many employees. It's just a small research shop where he's writing some reports, writes a book once a year, and you see that managerial class, consultant class in the gold industry a lot. I mean, we see it with the World Gold Council too. So I did an interview recently where I made the argument that there are people that truly believe in cryptocurrencies, and there's a lot of profiteers. And it's the same is true for the gold industry. People in the gold industry that are just profiteers. And of course, the protest will jump in right now and say, "Excuse me, Roy, you're a profiteer. You run a gold business. You make all your money from a gold business." I'll accept that criticism that I'm in the gold business. The truth is, I don't make my money from the gold business. I don't take a salary. I did well financially before I ever founded these businesses, and they've always been mission driven. And I probably would have done a lot better financially if I never got into these businesses, to be totally honest with you. But most of the people that are selling physical gold or that are buying physical gold are not doing it to get rich. They're doing it because they're concerned, because they're voicing some kind of desire to express their liberty. They understand money, and they're looking to preserve their purchasing power because they're getting screwed by the system in one way or another. And anyone in that system that's involved with writing research, speculating on futures, mining and just selling the product, and hedging it left and right, financing, credit, those are just profiteers. Those people exist because we exist. We exist because we understand gold. And so they should be there to serve us. And either way, this is what makes a market. It's good that you have all of these, quote, sophisticated people on the other side of the trade all the time. I mean, there's a guy named Mark Dow. I don't know if you ever heard of this guy. It's like the guy he's like allergic to gold. He goes out of his way all the time to tout how gold is useless. I mean, imagine being this delusional where you're fighting against a natural element every single day and pretending like the bid and offer price isn't real. It's literally like a small amount of gold, tiny amount of gold is $2,000. And you've got people out there, they're like, it's worthless. It's a 6,000-year bubble. Those are people that are delusional. They don't understand markets. They don't understand the first thing about a market.
And actually, Roy, you identified the key point there, which is the reason why we're doing this is because, there is like a mission statement thing that lies behind all of this, which is really those of us that have been interested and involved in this asset class or in gold and silver and miners in my case for a long time, really is driven a lot by principle. There is a principle element of this. So to call them cottage industry scammers when actually they're not driven, a lot of the time this really isn't driven by profit. And of course that's not true in most things. I think that gets right to the crux of why it's important to push back and be like, hold on, back off.
You know what a good way to say this, Ned, is I learned this from Goldman Sachs people. It's called long-term greedy. We're just long-term greedy, and everyone else is short-term greedy, because no one's going to believe that we're not in it for the profit. And I accept that criticism, but at least we're long-term greedy, where we're trying to make sense of something and make it work over the long term. These people are just in there every day trying to extract their spreads. And I think they have no right to make the claims, as you said. Again, I want to be very clear. No one should ever buy gold at high premiums. They're taking a risk if they're doing that.
Yeah. I mean, when it comes to gold, it's like one of the loan assets that essentially can help you protect your purchasing power and at times enhance it. And so it has this weird mix of fear and greed involved. But most people who are honest and principled in this industry, they got into this because they felt an emotional attachment to it, maybe, but more so a principled attachment to it, in the sense of this is to protect our property rights, and property rights now more than ever are being infringed upon. And so, look, I want to thank you guys a lot for doing this. It's not necessarily, maybe it doesn't put us in the best light talking like this sometimes about other people, but I will do my best so that the listeners can hear some of the antics that was displayed in their MacroVoices podcast together, and let the listeners hear it out. This may probably become a two-parter, because my expectation is it'll probably be an hour length on each side, so 2 hours total. But it'll be released hopefully soon. And I do want to thank you guys and give you any last word for the listeners out there.
We shouldn't be worried if we're responding. The coward dies 1,000 deaths, the valiant only once. So we were called out. He called me out on Twitter, and he called other people out, and they're calling out the whole industry. So we're just responding. Yeah,
I mean, likewise, for me, if you're gonna have a crack at people, you need to be on firm ground, and to say that they're not would be an understatement. So thanks for hosting, and I think it's been a worthwhile exercise.
Well, great. And listeners out there, look in the show notes for the Google Doc. That'll have a lot of documentation of what we discussed. And thanks for listening.